Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is sage grouse habitat. Joining us for our conversation about sage grouse and the situation here in Utah, Steve Madsen, who is the wildlife biologist for the Utah State Offices of the BLM, John Andrews, who is the associate director of the School Institutional Trust Land, SITLA, and we have Verlin Smith, who is the branch chief of renewable resources at the Utah BLM. That's quite a title, Verlin. And Commissioner Mike McKee, commissioner from Uintah County. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's just start with the fact that the BLM is actually, this is not just, as some would say in the recreational community, they would look at this and say the big bad BLM has just decided they found a new way to create wilderness by sage grouse habitat, or that this is the white owl of Utah, or the spotted owl of Utah, excuse me. But really this is an edict from Fish and Wildlife, and I just thought we'd take a moment to kind of address that you are actually just complying with regulations from another department. Is that correct?
Well, I think you may just describe it this way, whether it's you say it's a Fish and Wildlife Service edict, it is part of the process they go through under the Endangered Species Act to make a determination on what the status of a species is and whether or not it should be listed. BLM looks at it as both an opportunity and something we do need to respond to, because from BLM standpoint, we do not want to see the sage grouse listed, because that would have management implications for us as a management agency, also state agencies and private landowners and others if it becomes listed, because we essentially lose a lot of the flexibility and a lot of the control that we have now. So in a way, BLM has made the decision, yeah, we're going to go ahead with this to try and keep this species off from the Endangered Species Act or list.
Mike, what kind of frustrations are you seeing from a county level as far as the habitat or as this process goes forward? What are your concerns from county land in public lands?
Well, let me say first, we agree with BLM. We do not want to see the species listed. Mm-hmm. But from a concern point of view is, first of all, I think the Endangered Species Act needs to be reformed. There really isn't any credit that we can see that has been given for the amount of work that's happened in the state of Utah. There's been approximately $36 million that's been spent, about 400,000 acres that has been treated. And when this was looked at westwide, essentially U.S. Fish and Wildlife looked at sage grouse and essentially believed that sage grouse needs to be protected. Part of my frustration is you can't get a baseline number as to, what is the historical data? What are the historical numbers, that we've had with sage grouse? And then what is the numbers that we need to reach so that when do we have success? What is that number? And nobody can give you that number. And so they're talking about listing a species that we don't have, really good data on what those historical numbers are, nor will they give us, what those numbers that we need to get to, what do we need to achieve so that we have found success. And that's very frustrating. Mm-hmm. And then from an economic point of view, let me just give an example of some of the economics that can happen.
Okay.
In the resource management plan, which is a fairly recent management plan that was completed in late 2008. At that time, and I'm going to talk about oil and gas drilling here for just a moment, but we had to, there were studies that showed that we needed to be a quarter of a mile from a lek, from a sage grouse lek, mm-hmm. For disturbance. Now that's being discussed at a half mile, full mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles.
And pretty soon you're at the Duchesne County line.
And how many, at what point is there very little acreage left? And now to put this in an economic perspective, mm-hmm. BLM just recently released 6 leases that had been canceled. The bid just for the right to drill on those 6 leases was almost $50 million, $48.6 million. And that was about 6,000 acres. So you can see, and that's just for the right to drill. That has nothing to do with the actual royalties, the gas, the royalties that come from that, the jobs, the multiplier effects. And so this can have a tremendous a tremendous economic effect, not only in Utah but throughout the entire West.
Well, John, one of the areas that I hear the most about is the cattlemen are concerned about the fact that they're going to lose all their grazing allocations. And you know, I know BLM does a lot of grazing, but Sitla has lands I believe that you do some grazing on as well, don't you?
Well, Chad, one thing that we have learned from a longstanding scientific research project down in south central Utah in the Parker Mountain area of Wayne County is that a properly managed grazing regimen is totally consistent with increasing sage grouse numbers. There are the Parker Mountain population, we've been told by the biologist, is the healthiest sage grouse population in the state. Numbers have been increasing, and that's been done in the context of grazing. So the two don't have to be inconsistent.
Steve, what is the biggest threat? I mean, you know, where does the environment and habitat get most disturbed for sage grouse?
Well, it varies across the state. You know, the eastern part of the range, which includes Montana, Wyoming, some of the oil and gas areas and the Uinta Basin as well. The impacts that affect sage grouse the most there are the loss of habitat through disturbance and fragmentation, through road development, energy development, those types of things. When you move into the Great Basin, like the western part of Utah and Nevada, Idaho, Oregon, the biggest impact to the sage grouse there is the loss of habitat from fire, wildfire, and then invasive species, cheatgrass, moving into those areas after the fires have gone through. And that's a loss of habitat to the sage grouse as well.
So some of the $36 million that the state spent has been in correcting those sorts of things as far as the, you know, the ground cover and things of that nature. Do you know about that, John, at all?
And doing vegetation treatment and some predator control and things like that. They've had some real successes up in the Strawberry area with that sort of project.
Well, Verlin, one of the things that I'm sure that every time you've been in a scoping meeting and they're talking, I'm sure hunting has come up as one of the real frustrations. Has that been the case?
It has. We just recently concluded our scoping meetings for this planning process we're going through for sage grouse, and hunting came up in just about every single meeting. I'd say hunting comes under the jurisdiction of the state. DWR, Division of Wildlife Resources, manages that, and they're the ones that make that decision. They've got their reasons why and why not it should or should not be hunted. So that's their question to deal with.
Mike, you've been on the show long enough that I know when you're itching to say something.
Well, you know, what I'm going to say is controversial, so but it usually is. But as was mentioned, I'm sure there are reasons the biologists and that look at this, but it just seems a little strange to me that on the one hand we're looking at listing a species that's going to have a devastating economic effect in Utah and in the West, and at the same time we continue to hunt in selected areas, and it just seems to me it's inconsistent to me. But as again, my belief is the Endangered Species Act needs to be reformed. First of all, you know, there are many that believe that, you know, the numbers really aren't that bad, and why are we going through this whole process and this whole problem if our numbers are sufficient? Utah has been very proactive on this issue. We've been proactive for a number of years. As I mentioned, 400,000 acres have been treated. There's been a lot of work that's been done on pinyon juniper, removing that, putting in grasses and sagebrush and the kind of things that really helps the habitat. Mm-hmm. And so it just seems to me
a more proactive point of view. We actually want to discuss that and more of the partnership and interagencies working on things. And we'll do that when we come back right here on the county seat. Stay with us. We'll continue our discussion in just a minute.
I remember the first time that our family found that canyon road. I thought, here we go again, another road to nowhere. But boy, was I wrong. It was 9 Mile Canyon. And what we saw was more than I could ever have expected. At the end of the day, my son asked,
Mom, can we come back here again?
That was all I needed to hear.
What happens in Utah's Castle Country stays with you. Find out more at castlecountry.com.
What brings you to St. George?
Business meeting.
Staying long?
Just here for the day. Quick in and out.
Hey, I just landed. Can we meet in a half an hour?
Not too bad. Why so fast?
Stay any longer, we'll run out of things to do. On second thought.
Buddy, something's come up. I'm gonna need another hour. Can we push the meeting till noon? I am definitely gonna need to reschedule. Holy...
Sit back, relax, and enjoy your 45-minute flight to Salt Lake. How'd that meeting go?
I should have booked a weekend.
Native Americans called it the land of the sleeping rainbow. It's a place of unparalleled enchantment, where history, splendor, and industry meet. We call it Sevier County. Experience the Paiute Trail by ATV. Explore 7 national parks, all within a few hours' drive. Gaze down at the world from an entirely new perspective. Join us in Sevier County and discover real Utah. Come, explore the Paiute Trail and beyond.